I joined the Air Force to keep from going into the Army. And then, as it turned out, I spent probably 80% of my career with the Army. My name is Robert Scott. I came in the Air Force in 1968, May 22nd. I spent my first few years as ground radio maintenance, eventually transitioned over to the TACP career field in '77, multiple deployments, of course. And then I retired in December of 1990. Firm grip on what the TACPs can do. You've shown it, you've proven it, and now we're going to grow on that. And because of what we did here in October, it's going to change this career field.
The people who knock these buildings down are here all of us.
America is at war.
I got out of high school in '67, didn't really have much ambition to drive anywhere or do anything, I was kind of just wailing around. And I got a job up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, driving for an oil company. And I got a draft notice and to report down to Philadelphia. And I looked at my dad and I said, man, I can't do that. I'm not going in the Army. He's prior Air Force. And he says, well, you better hadn't. And I said, okay. So anyway, we kind of ignored it for a while. And then I got another draft notice for non-compliance. And I said, oh, boy, they're chasing me down because they didn't know exactly where I was living between Maryland and Pennsylvania at the time.
The war in Vietnam is a combined and joint effort, whatever you are. Soldier, sailor, Marine, or airman.
The Vietnam War was pretty strong right then still, and everybody was afraid of going into the draft. That's why they were chasing everybody around, and a lot of riots going on, all that kind of stuff. It was pretty crazy stuff. But that's why I decided to go ahead and get in the military. I wasn't ambitious enough or financially able to go to college, so like they say, the easiest way is get in the military, get some education, and get your life back on track. I decided to go ahead and enlist, and I went up to Norristown, the Air Force recruiter, and I talked to them, and they said they had a job in electronics, but it was a 6-month delay in enlistment. And I said, well, how does that deal with the draft? And he said, well, there is no draft if you sign this paper today. And I said, well, okay. So I signed the paper, and while I was waiting my 6 months to enlist, the sheriff and a recruiter came to my house and said they were going to take me to the Army. And I said, well, I've already signed up for the Air Force. I said, we hear that all the time, unless you got some paperwork, I said, well, let me see if I can find it. And sure enough, I got my contract out, and I showed it to him. And then he says, well, I guess you're off the hook. And they just turned around and walked away. And then I spent my 6 months just trying to make some money and keep alive. And finally, I went in the Air Force on the 22nd of May.
This arc is being created by two charged bodies. One is a positive charge, the other a negative charge.
I was assigned electronics, which I was surprised, and got what I wanted, pretty much, ground radio maintenance. And then I went to Korea in '71, and that's when I got introduced to the ROMAD career field, the ROMAD additional duty, as they called it back then. I kind of liked it. I liked driving the Jeep all over the countryside and working on the radios that I had been trained to work on, and so it was a fun job. So anyhow, we would get on the radio and we'd be sitting out there, and I'd be talking to the fighters, and stuff, just calmly, routinely, reading the non-lines and all that kind of stuff, and just having fun of it. It was like a game, more or less, And then we got a couple of live fire exercises going on and stuff like that. It was just kind of interesting. The lieutenant there would be hung over or something, and he'd say, hey, can you talk to this guy, just read in this stuff here and say okay or roger that and be done with it. And that's kind of how it first started. But in the squadron, in the 21st task that I was at, they did local exercises, we call them scoreboard exercises, and we'd go out and we'd control cash in the mowers down there in Charlie Mow. But we also had some airplanes, little tiny airplanes that we flew back in the '70s, which I think is ironic today because it's so big now. But we had little model airplanes, and we'd practice talking to each other, flying these little airplanes around in the field. like we were a fighter ground guy, you know? And that's how we basically honed the procedures of doing it.
Proceed inbound to the following grid. 9er, 3, 6, 3, 7, 8. Advise whenever you copy target brief. Order, proceeding 9er, 3, 6, 3, 7, 8. Go ahead with your brief. Roger, slang 1-7. Wrap back brief follows.
Then in around April of '77, I was reassigned back to Shaw again. And they made me sign some paperwork in processing, 2096, I think they called it back then. And I asked them what that was for, and they said it's a change of AFSC. And I said, to what? And they said, TACP. And I said, what the hell is that? And I didn't know what it was, you know. I mean, I knew what ROMADs were, but they never really called them TACPs back then, you know. And I said, okay, where am I going to be stationed? They said, you know, back at 21st Task. I said, okay. So I went there for a while. We were pretty much freelancing it. We didn't have a structure per se. We were on blanket TDY orders a month at a time. We didn't have a schoolhouse. Everybody was pretty much grandfathered into the job by having prior experience with a Jeep and some radios. We considered us different. I mean, we knew we were bastard children. We knew that. And the TACPs have always been a bastard child of the Air Force and the Army. So, you know, neither one of them wanted us, but we were having fun, so we didn't care. I didn't mind it. I like I say, I had experience with the Jeeps. I liked doing that. And it was still something different than the regular Air Force. And that's kind of what I wanted to be. But an interesting note is, you know, I joined the Air Force to keep from going into the Army. And then, as it turned out, I spent probably 80% of my career with the Army. So, you know, it's kind of ironic that that happened. But we were offered some awards one time by the Army, and the Air Force shot it down. And then the Air Force gave us something else, so, which is all right. But yeah, there was still, especially I would think up in the command area of the Army and stuff, they didn't want us, they didn't realize the capability we were trying to provide at the time. We were just a thorn to them because they had to provide us, you know, billeting and housing and all that kind of stuff, and they're not their troops. I said, why are we giving all this stuff to these Air Force people? Let them go to an Air Force base. That was the attitude, I think, back in the early 80s or whatever, you know. And so again, that reflects on the, you know, troops themselves. We didn't get any real hardcore notoriety with the Army per se until a lot later on, you know.
Operation Urgent Fury.
Lance Heaton, Sergeant Heaton, and I couldn't tell him anything except we have an exercise coming up, a deployment, and we need an extra guy. You want to go? And he says, well, I don't know. I did talk to 2 others ahead of time, and they didn't want to go. So I finally got a hold of Heaton, and he said, yeah, he'd go. And I said, well, I'll brief you on the way down. So as we're driving down from Shaw back to Savannah, I told him, he says, this is something you may not come back from. And he goes, what are you talking about? I said, we're going to deploy real world, and we're going to be shooting people. And you need to know that before you walk through that gate, because once you go through that gate on Hunter, you're not coming back out. And he said, I'm in. Some people went down to the local gas station or the library or whatever and got a tourist map to see where the hell Grenada's at. Some people picked up some tourist maps in country, but what the Air Force had were not. They were photo imageries that we had from a U-2 flyover, and they were like less than 24 hours old. We went to a big hangar for a briefing from Colonel Taylor, the battalion commander, and there's literally hundreds of piles of munitions. There's a pile right here of ammo cans, a couple of laws, stack of hand grenades, you know, some claymores, and the sergeant major up there said, all right, cover down on a pile. I said, what? I can't even lift that shit. So everybody's lining up on these piles. You know, we're just one of the Army troops now, you know. So Colonel Taylor stands up and he gives his little hoo-ah brief and all that kind of stuff. And he says, gentlemen, I want you to understand one thing. This is not an exercise. You have congressional authority to shoot to kill. And that place erupted. The whole ceiling just vibrated. you know, and everybody's grabbing hand grenades and grabbing bullets and shoving them in their pockets. And I pick up this law, and I'm looking at it because I don't even think I've ever fired one before. And I'm looking at it, and this ranger says, "Hey, Air Force, you don't want that, do you?" And I said, "No." And he grabbed it out of my hand and stuffed it in his rucksack. And I'm like, man, these guys are serious. So we just had our Prick 66 radio. We had a 25 radio we took with us as well, and a couple of batteries each, and a normal basic load of ammunition. You know, little Gal 5s is what we carry. And we had 2 ammo pouches of 30-round magazines, and that's all we took. I said, I've got all my firepower somewhere else, you know? I don't need all this. And you guys better protect me, is what I'm thinking. So we loaded up into 7 C-130s, and I was in the first aircraft, Alpha Company, and so we actually jumped in there then. And then we got radio reports. We're getting these little slips coming through. Marines didn't make it in there. The SEALs didn't make it in there. And now we're going in there with blind. There's no beacon on the ground because CCT didn't get the beacon in there. So we're going in pretty much blind. But fortunately, we had an MC-130, which has the high-speed navigation stuff on it, you know. I wasn't a young kid, and it was hard for me to keep up with those Rangers. I mean, really hard, and I'll admit it, it was hard. When we got on the ground, of course, we had like 2 swings under the canopy and we hit the ground. Barely had time to lower the rucksack before we hit the ground. And I'm laying there getting out of my equipment, gathering everything up, and I'm checking, I'm good. Now, I can hear some fire going on, but I'm not seeing it, I just hear it. You know, I have a rally point, so we're working our way down the runway. We get down halfway down there, and I link up with this Ranger Holden, and he says, "Come on, we gotta meet up over here where we're going." I said, all right, I'm humping, you know, my little rucksack and all that. And this guy comes down. This is so funny, I hate to even say it, it's embarrassing as well. This guy shows up on a motorcycle, and he says, "Captain wants you up front right now." I said, okay, because I'm working my way up there, you know, because I was number 6 out the door, so I'm at the front edge of the landing area, and everybody else is strung out closer to the assembly point. So I'm a long ways off, and he says, "Well, get on the bike, we'll take you." I said, okay, now I got my rucksack on, my radios and batteries and all that stuff on. It's a heavy ruck. So I get on the bike, and then he goes, "Let's go." And before I could grab him around the waist, he took off. I flip off the back of the bike, and I'm laying on my back on my rucksack on the ground, and that Ranger Holden is looking down at me like, "Damn, Air Force." And the bike swings around and comes back. And Holden says, "I'll take your ruck." So I got on the bike and I went up to the CP, and Ranger Holden brought my ruck and his ruck up to the CP. So that was a rather embarrassing moment, but we had maps, we had good maps. What we didn't have was the targeting information on those maps. We didn't have good lat longs on them. And so what we had to do, we coordinated with the AC-130 guys ahead of time, and we put target numbers or reference numbers on the maps. And we used those numbers as references for targets. And that's how we did it. We didn't have any high-speed shit going on, nothing. We just said, hey, you know, talk to the AC-130. Hey, I got a target. You know where 26 is on the map? Roger that. We're about 300 yards northeast of that, and drop something. Okay, we got you. And that's pretty much where it was. It was fly by night, you know, seat of your pants type stuff. After action reports, you know, the lessons learned, more radios, better quality radios. We could have had better radios. There were more technically advanced radios in those 66s back then that we didn't have access to. Combat Control probably had them, but we didn't have them. It didn't even dawn on me until one time, Major Roper, we're back at Shaw, and he's telling me then, he said, you know, you kind of made history here. And I said, well, I don't know, I just did my job. You know, that's what we're supposed to do. He says, no, you don't understand, Scotty. He was a big, big believer in the TACP career field. He was a Raven fac, I guess, over in Vietnam, and he used enlisted guys flying with him back then. And he said, you were the first TACP to call an live airstrike in combat. You understand that? Okay, there was others there, you know. He said, no, there was 2 others there, yes. But you called in the first ones. You're the one that did it. I went, well, do I get a promotion? And I did, actually, I got a step promotion, so that was kind of cool. Says you've created an environment that's going to grow into something really great. He said, you were part, not only part, but you were part of that, getting a firm grip on what the TACPs can do. You've shown it, you've proven it, and now we're going to grow on that. And because of what we did here in October, it's going to change his career field. It's going to advance it to God knows what.
The Rangers' next objective was to clear the bluff overlooking the airfield, from which heavy sniper fire continued to pour.
There's a movie out called Heartbreak Ridge. The white truck on the runway, I was behind that white truck, me and several other Rangers, and the first casualty was Ranger Umonte. He got hit right straight in the face, and he was next to me. He was shoulder to shoulder with me. And how that happened, we started taking small fire, so we hid behind that truck. And we were laying down on the ground on the runway behind that truck, and AC-130's over top. I'm not talking to him yet, but Sergeant Ramsey asked me to check on the Umonte because he stopped firing. He was an M60 gunner, and he wasn't firing. So I hit him. I said, "Are you all right?" I thought he had a jam or something, you know? So I'm hitting him, and he just leaned over, and he'd been shot in the face. And I said, "Oh, God." So I told Ramsey, I said, "He's dead." He said, "What?" I said, "He's dead." Holy shit. So he asked me to get some air power. He said, "You got to take that building out." That's where it came, that building over there, because he fired some laws at it, and they didn't do any good, because laws will go through a building, and they won't impact it, hit something really solid. And anyhow, he said, "You need to get some air in there." Now this is not to be funny, but it's kind of cool. I called up the 130, told him we had target, told him where it was. You got the white truck on the east end of the runway. Yeah, roger that. Okay, there's a building just north of that, a couple hundred yards. And he said, "How far?" I said, "A couple hundred yards." He says, "Danger close, you know, we cannot fire on that target." And I said, "We're taking heavy rounds from that target." And so they put some 20s on it, you know, and tried to boom it up a little bit, and it didn't do anything. And then Ramsey said, "How come you're not taking out that target?" I said, "They won't fire, it's too close." He said, "Well, you tell them to fire on it." And I called him up again. I said, "Hey, we need ordnance, need 105 on that building." And he said, "It's danger close. We'll need company commander approval to fire that close." I said, "Okay, there's no company commander here," you know? So I looked at Ramsey and I said, "They need commander's approval." And he said, "You got it. I'm the commander of this section right here." And I said, "Okay." So I pressed the mic and I said, "You got," and boom. Before I could even finish the conversation, the rounds came out, hit that building and blew it up. It was that quick. I mean, they were on it, just waiting for that click of the mic to get the okay. And as soon as I hit the mic, I said, "You," and I heard the rounds come down. I said, wow, that was pretty cool. And then we got behind that bulldozer that came by. And this is in the movie too. Did you get behind the bulldozer? Captain Abizade, who is now a retired 4-star general, was in the bulldozer. And me and Doc Donovan and a couple other guys were going up the hill behind that bulldozer and went by that building that we blew up, and I could see the remnants of people and parts and all that stuff because they did a job on that. But we got up top of the hill, that was in the movie, and took up some positions there. The other one was the Rangers trapped in, pinned down in a building. They said it was Marines. It was a company of Rangers, or a platoon of Rangers. And they didn't have any comm. They had VS-17 panel, which I could see. And I got A7 on the air. I said, "We have a target up here." Now, you know, the mountains, the hills and the rolls and all that, I couldn't see everything behind that building. I could just see the building. And I could see the panel hanging out the window. And I said, "Okay, you've got a building, X number of meters, same direction as that building was, further up the hill." And they said, "Okay, I do not have eyes." And I said, "Well, it's the red roof building right off the end of the runway, right off the northeast end of the runway." And this is a quote, if I can say this. He said, "Do you know how many fucking red roofs I can see up here?" And I said, "Roger that, sir. Okay, it's the closest one to the runway." "All right." Well, he dropped his bombs the first time I cleared him through, and nothing happened. And they was dropping clamshell, you know, Mark 82s, whatever they were, and they weren't opening up. And they were opening, but they weren't arming. And I told him that. I said, "You know, your angle," I'm not a fighter pilot, okay? And he let me know that. He said, "Oh, now you're trying to tell me how to drop my bombs? And this is on the radio." I said, "Negative, sir. I'm just trying to tell you they did not arm up. They did not implode." And he goes, ah. And then I guess Major Roper heard his conversation. He gets on there and he tells them, you know, to check switches, check armament and all that kind of stuff and fly by again. So the second pass they came by, they were higher at a bigger angle, and I could see the clamshells open up, and then I could see the bomblets buzzing down, and they exploded. And so that was the second thing. We got them out of there on that. But talking to some of the Rangers, the unexploded ones had actually hit on the building. They were bouncing off the roof and stuff. So it's a good thing they didn't arm up. And then the third thing was the BTR-60s. After everything kind of settled down a little bit, there was a couple of BTR-60s coming in to the east end of the runway. And so they called me and asked me to put some fire on that. Now, the Rangers already hit them with some 90 millimeters, so they'd stopped them. But the captain wanted them eliminated. So we went ahead and put a couple of 105 rounds on those guys. And so I did that one. That was my three major. You know, we had some other ones who took, I worked some Cobra helicopters on an antenna array and the radio towers and stuff. Took out a couple of them. And the A7s, you know, so I worked three different aircraft, Cobras and A7s and the ACs. And Lance Heaton was working some of the Cobras. We had to swap back and forth because we were both in the same target, in the same area. And my round cartridges coming out of the Cobra were dropping on them. And so we had to cease fire on that, but we coordinated well on that.
Grenada, we were told, was a friendly island paradise for tourism. Well, it wasn't. It was a Soviet-Cuban colony being readied as a major military bastion to export terror and undermine democracy. We got there just in time.
The Army tried to put us in for accommodation medal or something, and the Air Force said no. And I later found out that 9th Air Force and TAC were both pissed off because we were out of country without prior permission. We deployed without their knowledge. And it's in the after-action report again that the colonel up there, my colonel, 507th, he was absolutely livid. He said, how can you deploy without even telling us? You know, they do their sorts reports every day, I guess, status of troops and all that kind of stuff. Well, we weren't around. We were gone, and they didn't know that. Retaliation was, you don't get any award for disobeying directives or disobeying, you know, orders and stuff. Well, we didn't have any orders from you. We had orders from our battalion down there. And it took about a year and a half. They finally came around and said, okay, you can have the Bronze Star or whatever, because they were going for another one, but downgraded it to a Bronze Star, so that's all right. Well, I never really understood the politics of it. I was pissed the whole time. And the biggest thing I wanted to get my little star on my jump wings. And the Air Force said, no, it's not authorized. You got to go through uniform board procedures and all this kind of stuff. I was in the commissary over at Fort Stewart one day, and I'm in my uniform, and I had my little handmade, hand-sewn star on my cloth jump wings, you know. The little bartender downtown in Savannah was making these up for the Rangers. She was sewing these little stars on their jump wings and giving them to them. So I got one, and I had it on my uniform. And this general came up to me in the commissary and looked at me. He says, very good, Air Force.